USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, November 28th, 2022. Each week we look back at the highlights of the weekend and the news of the week. This podcast is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. They say sweeps are really hard to come by, and very few teams were able to sweep on the weekend, especially in the top 10. How about going through some of these results and making sense of it? Only one team had a sweep in the top 10, and that was Penn State sweeping Alaska Anchorage to improve to 13-3-0.
Well, I think, first of all, I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving, didn't stuff themselves too much, because sitting around watching football or the tremendous amount of college hockey that was on TV. So hopefully people are still able to walk to work today. But I'll tell you, it was an interesting weekend. And from my perspective, I know we're going to get into one by one. And you talked about sweeps, and they're hard to come by. But I also think a lot of these results, wins and ties, anytime you can take more points on the road or more points neutral site, I think those are good weekends. And we're going to talk eventually about Arizona State, and we're going to talk about Quinnipiac, and we're going to talk about some of these other teams. But I think when you get more points nowadays than anybody, no matter where it is, it's so hard to win in college hockey. Anytime you could take 4 of 6 points or 5 of 6 or anything more than 3, I think that's a successful weekend. And I think we're discrediting, because of some overtime losses and some things like that, how good some of these weekends really were.
Well, I will jump on the Penn State question and say that I'm still impressed by this team. I had them in the top 2 or 3 on my ballot. I can't remember exactly where I put them. I know I didn't have them number 1, but I'm really impressed that no matter who the opponent is, somehow Guy Gadowski's team is finding a way to win. They're doing great within the Big Ten, which we've said many times this season is the best conference based on just their out of conference winning percentage alone. And then you add in, the fact that they're doing great out of conference. They're perfect outside of the Big Ten. So they're really impressing me, and another couple of wins, against Alaska Anchorage. That this team feels like a train. They keep rolling, and you can't take anything away from that. I don't think that the voters in the USCHO poll or any of the polls are at that point yet, but I'm really close to the point that I don't mind using the word pairwise. So I'm going to go ahead and say pairwise. Look at where they are in the pairwise right now. I mean, Penn State is the team to beat in the pairwise. That's a good sign for this team. They play in a tough conference, and they are winning the games they need to win. And when you look at the top of the pairwise, you've got 2 Big Ten teams. Minnesota's there as well. But I'm just really impressed at this point that Penn State, 13 wins out of 16 games. This is a team that the train is running, and somebody's got to find a way to stop it, or they will become a pretty dominant team in the second half.
You can use the word pairwise, because Arizona State did that in their media release. They said Arizona State upends number 1 Minnesota. And I'm like, they're not number 1. They're number 2. And you read the article, and at that time, that going into that game, they were number 1 in the pairwise.
Correct.
So they, and you can use a pairwise now whenever, I guess.
My standard has always been everybody has to play 10 games. And right now you have 2 Ivies, or maybe 3 that have played 8 and a couple that have played 9. So this weekend we will get there, but I'm going to use it for now just to prove a point. Penn State, they're a train.
Well, we'll find out as the season goes on and they get really deep into Big Ten play for sure. You mentioned teams having a good weekend with a tie and a win. Quinnipiac had a very good weekend. They won the Friendship 4 with a win over Dartmouth and a tie and a shootout win over UMass. That really goes in the books as, it's all non-conference, but it's helpful in the pairwise. And Quinnipiac is a team that just keeps doing Quinnipiac things.
Just 1 loss to this point, and that stands out to me. When you can get to this point in the season, we're almost at the break, and you only have 1 loss. They've got a few ties in there, but still, this team is rolling. Again, it's very similar to Penn State. People sit there and say, "Oh, they don't have a high strength of schedule." Okay, I get it. They play in the ECAC, and that league is definitely having a down year. But at the same time, they're winning games and they're beating tough opponents. And that game against UMass the other day, I got a chance to watch that one on Saturday afternoon, and that was a battle, an absolute battle. And Yanni Perret is just as good this year as he was his rookie campaign. He is showing that he deserves every accolade he will get throughout this season. He's a tough goaltender to beat. Yeah, he gave up 2 both nights, which I think was probably a little bit of an aberration for him. But you're also talking about teams that are, in a tournament setting where there's a lot of competition. He played fantastic, stopped all 3 shots he had to in the shootout. So that Quinnipiac got a 1-0 win in the shootout and ends up winning the Belpaw Trophy. So fantastic weekend for Quinnipiac. They are rolling. And, again, another team, I believe they're 3rd right now in the pairwise. They're just going to be a team that you got to find a way to knock them off. They will not beat themselves.
They're my number 1 team. If you let me vote anymore. But they're my number 1 team right now. I'll just leave it at that. I've got some more thoughts. I know we're going to bring up the tournament in Belfast, but what a great event. And, I think we can leave it till later when Ed brings it up. But I think I've got another opinion looking at it from a different direction.
For the record, my number 1 team is well on my ballot, and my ballots actually do get it sent in. So they will get some number 1 votes this week. I guarantee you that.
I took a peek as our poll administrator is counting the ballots, and we're recording this before the poll is done, but at least 6 teams will get number 1 votes this week.
That's not crazy when you think about the fact that, we're going to get into it, but Denver lost a game. They were the number 1 team, and in the top 5, you had a bunch of teams lose. So it's really hard, I think, for voters right now to sit there and say who is the best team. But Derek, I agree with you. For my value, Quinnipiac is the best.
They were also number 1 on my ballot for what it matters.
Whoa! What is What is going on here? We're all agreeing. Whoa!
We like to agree. It's Thanksgiving. Come on, we're still in the Thanksgiving spirit.
It's Friendsgiving here. What? Cyber Monday. I just got an email from the University of Minnesota asking if giving me 66% off tickets. I mean, what's going on with this world? I didn't even know I was on their mailing list, and then we're all agreeing on stuff. Wow.
Well, we'll see if we can keep it rolling. It's very hard to get a sweep. Michigan had to rally to come back to tie 4-4 on Friday, and then they beat Harvard on Saturday after Michigan beat Ohio State. But I think this says good things about both teams, actually. It
does. I mean, Harvard played pretty good hockey out there. They were pretty close to a win on Friday and then let that one slip away and ended up with the tie. They did the shootout for really no reason. They won the shootout. That doesn't matter. Saturday, a little more difficult game. That place was packed. The football team, once they got off their charter back from Ohio State, made their way over to Yost, ended up storming the ice during the second period. That doesn't always fly well with the referees. They did not enjoy that one. No protocol penalties issued, though. We should note that. All that said, I think that Michigan is playing Michigan hockey now. They had some bumps along the way early, but I like the way they're playing.
Yeah, I would think if anything called for a protocol penalty, that might be it. I mean, you open the door and you got the quarterback hugging the goalie and Jim Harbaugh out by the dots, and the referee shooing him off the ice, and that's what a good video. Neat to see. I'm glad they didn't call penalty. I think they're all silly penalties with the protocol. We beat that one to death, kind of like we did college hockey stats last year. So
our one cause every year.
Yeah, and we didn't get college hockey stats back, and I don't know if we'll see how we do with protocol violations, but. Neat scene at Michigan. And it was kind of what I think we were waiting to see Harvard. We're waiting to see how good they really were, at least in my opinion, going in there undefeated and coming out there with their, a tie and a loss. Once again, I think you look at Michigan's side of the equation there, that's still against a high ranked team. That's a good split. I mean, more than a split, that's a good win and a good tie. So you're getting more points than you would normally. They would have lost the shootout, obviously, so they still would have got 4. But when you're beating good quality teams like that, to come out on that side of ledger's always a good thing.
Among the top teams, St. Cloud State was idle, so no blemishes or gains for them. The other 6 teams in the top 10 all dropped games. Denver on Friday lost 3-0 to Omaha in a split. Jake Kuharski, who had been with AIC and was quietly benched at the end of the season, Providence before that, transferred to Omaha, got the shutout.
Boy, is Omaha the team that keeps surprising? I mean, we look at some of the weekends they had early, and I think everybody was down in Omaha, and then they've put some nice wins on the board of late. And that one stood out to me, a shutout on the road at Denver. Not an easy place to play, not an easy place to win. Denver bounced back the second night, not surprising, but still, that's a pretty impressive victory, especially a shutout on the road.
Yeah, we talked about that weekend to open against Niagara and how bad it would hurt them. Luckily for Omaha, Niagara's doing very well. So they're both in the mid. They're both tied at 25 in the pairwise. So Omaha, that might not kill Omaha as bad as we thought it would at the beginning. And you look at some results, some other results. LIU taking Ohio State, that really crashed Ohio State down in the pairwise big time. Good win for LIU. Great crowd. I watched part of that game, and but I'll tell you, it'll be interesting to see if we go back when we get the pairwise. You be the committee and change some results where teams at 20-ish would be without that one big loss that some of those teams seem to have. The Western Michigan right now, they've done so well. They haven't that loss against Fairbanks really has not hurt them as well. So it'll be really interesting to see some of those ones that are like in the 15s and the 13s, they could be number 2 or number 1 seeds without those big losses. And some of those 20s, they may struggle with that one big loss, like Omaha is right now with the 2 to Niagara.
Minnesota, 6-5 loss in overtime at Arizona State. Let's talk a little bit about both teams. Arizona State keeping their at-large hopes alive with that. The pairwise is everything for them. And I just want to mention one thing. They have had a very active and, let's say, snarky social media presence online at Arizona State right from the get-go. And after their loss on Friday, what were they tweeting out? Minnesota missing an empty net opportunity late in the game, and say, oh, you can't remember that. And then, the meme with the guy looking at the other girl and all that kind of stuff. It's like, right. Anyway, but a good weekend for Greg Powers' team. Those results against Minnesota are going to help them a lot.
Well, I think they were referring to Logan Cooley missed that empty net, but he also did Minnesota refuses to call the Michigan. Our friend Jess Myers, they call it a lacrosse goal because Minnesota doesn't want to call it the Michigan because of obviously the Big Ten rivalry. But I think that's kind of where that went. Interesting. We talked about the Twitter of the reaction of the win that Greg Powers had in the locker room. And you never want to apologize for wins. You never want to be, you never know when your next win's going to come from. But I will tell you this, that was an absolute must. And granted, it wasn't overtime, but they had to get some pairwise credit out of that because as we've noted numerous times before, it's going to be tough for them once they get through this other part of the schedule when they're playing all the other independents to make up a lot of pairwise ground. So they needed to get some pairwise credit out of that. Granted, it was an overtime, but you look back on some signature wins. We had some when we beat BU. We beat Notre Dame when they were number 2. We beat BU when they were number 8. We beat Miami when they were number 1. We swept them. You have signature wins that you put on the wall. You talk about all the time, and that's going to be one of those for a young program. They had beat the number 4 team in the nation previously, but this is the number 2 or number 1 if you want to call it on the pairwise. Those are things that you, with a new program, a new rink, trying to establish tradition, that's a win that the celebration's on the wall with the background and the new Mullet Arena.
Yeah. And by the way, the reason that Minnesota doesn't call that goal the Michigan is because they were the victim of it. Let's not forget that goal cost them a berth to the Frozen Four. I agree with you about Arizona State. This is a signature win. And, it's as I'm sitting there on a weekend night and I'm usually trying to update the front page for USCHO. And I kind of forget how big of a win this was for Arizona State because they've had success, because they've had a little bit of success. I forget the fact that they really haven't had enough of those signature wins. They've had some good ones. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, an NCAA tournament win was a great one. But I also look back and say, I just feel like they've already arrived. So when you beat a team like Michigan, Minnesota, what does it matter? Well, you saw it in Greg Powers' face. He came in the drama behind it too. A sold out building. Your first month in Mullet Arena, the place was banged out. The crowd was alive, and the goal came with 1 second left in overtime. I mean, that crowd went nuts. The celebration was great, and then Greg Powers coming in with the pitchfork, the devil's pitchfork, and stabbing it into a bunch of dirty laundry, knocking all of it on the ground and then getting tackled by his team. That's a pretty fun looking atmosphere. And I guarantee that team, that's one of those wins that you mentioned. They're the ones you put up on the wall, Derek, but they're also the ones you build your season around. And you go on a run now if you're Arizona State because of the fact that you've got the momentum, you got that excitement in your locker room. That can be a game changer.
But you also got to remember it's at a new building. Like you said, banged out crowd, new, beautiful building. There's some times where you probably had the same type of celebration at Oceanside Arena that you want to burn those pictures because they got some rust on the ceiling or something that you don't want. Those are the ones, like I said, when you're updating your walls, you're going to want that with the crowd going crazy in the background and the celebration. And like you said, you find a one with a gopher with down on their one knee behind or something that you sell to recruits. And like I said, it may not be a signature win because they've already arrived, but it's something that you're able to put on a wall and be able to go, oh, look at that. You beat Michigan or you beat Minnesota. Like we've got a picture from when we beat Michigan with one of our players with Zach Rowinski chasing him. Well, we always use that one because obviously he was the biggest name in that game. So you use those pictures for your advantage as far as recruiting goes, hyping your program, and now obviously with their new building.
Let's do some quick hits on the other ones left in the top 10 from the weekend. UConn got routed in its only game 6-0 by Cornell at Madison Square Garden.
Well, I think that I'll start with Cornell. Good win for them, really good win, and they've needed some good wins to get their season back on track. But for UConn, this is now an interesting test. Is this an aberration? Which I tend to think it is. I mean, they have not been blown out in any game. They have not given up 6 goals or even near 6 goals throughout the season. So it felt like a bit of an aberration type game. But their next few games, as they head into the break now, they've got to come back and maybe put some statement games together, some good wins. It starts Tuesday night when they face Merrimack on the road. We talked about this one last week. Maybe we weren't thinking about this game as being one of the big games in Hockey East this season. But, here you've got a Merrimack team that is red hot, and you've got a UConn team that is coming in with lick wounds. I mean, it has to hurt to go onto a big stage like Madison Square Garden and just lay an egg.
Yeah, you're going to have those games. And Cornell always gets up for the games that they play at Madison Square Garden. But Tuesday night, who would have thought 8 versus 11 in the pairwise, Merrimack at 8, Connecticut at 11. I mean, what a big event. And I'm going to go back. This was my thing right off the bat. I'm going to go back to Minnesota, Arizona State real quick. Not a bad weekend for Minnesota, though. We can't forget that because Arizona State had the big weekend, a win and overtime loss on the road. A lot of credit in that one. Now moving forward to UConn, huge test on Tuesday. Where they go with I don't know if where they go with their season is here, but you don't want to start looking at yourself going, and having questions. Big test on the road for them Tuesday.
Providence had a split weekend. They rallied from behind to beat St. Lawrence, but then for the first time in 6 years, Brown downed them for the Mayor's Cup there in Providence.
Yeah, that kind of feels like, a turkey comb or something. It was a tough win to get the victory at home against St. Lawrence, and then you come back and you don't play that well. And give credit to Brown. I mean, they really played a fantastic game. and closed out a game in the third period, which can be one of those difficult challenges. Providence has been a team that comes back. We saw them do it, as I said, against St. Lawrence. So I look at this for Providence. They're shaking their heads and saying, where are we? Because this is a darn good Providence team. One of the better teams that Nate Lehman has had down there. They have the depth up front. They have plenty of scoring. They've just got to find a way to put everything together. They're still a young team, and Nate Lehman hates to use that term because even most of his youngest players are actually sophomores. They had such a young team last year. They're still, I think, the 6th or 7th youngest team in the country, but he knows that these are experienced players who should be winning. So I think that this will, it's one of those weekends where maybe you can kind of go back and say, all right, this wasn't good, guys. Maybe we need to just erase the board and get things going back in the right direction. I think that you take out the teachable moments, but you don't have to harp on every mistake that came out of this weekend.
Who would ever thought that you would have had a sweep for Brown that weekend? They were 1-6-1 going into the weekend, beat Holy Cross 3-0. Another game that they closed out. I watched the end of that game because it was in the afternoon on Friday. They didn't give up anything in the third period. They had to kill a few penalties at the end, but they were blocking shots, and Karan was really good in net. And then to go and beat Providence in the Mayor's Cup where they haven't won, probably didn't have a lot of confidence. This could be a little bit of a turnaround for Brown. We'll see how they do going forward. They're now 3-6-1, not as desperate as 1-6-1, but looking at it once again, I seem to be looking at it from the other side of everything we're talking about. But good weekend for Brown and big result for them. They don't get a lot of publicity sometimes, and this might be the time where you get a sweep. They deserve a little thumbs up.
Last on our list is Minnesota State. They lost and tied with Michigan Tech, won the shootout on the second night. So 2 out of 6 points for Minnesota State and a big 4 points for Michigan Tech.
We've been talking about Michigan Tech the last couple of weeks as somebody that's on the cusp of being at the top of the CCHA, and we keep bringing up the CCHA, and is there a changing of the guard? And we're getting close. I mean, right now you've got Michigan Tech that's in first place ahead of Bowling Green, but they've got the second best winning percentage at 600, and Minnesota State's at 708. So it's getting close. And to be able to, maybe a statement weekend for Michigan Tech, taking 4 or 6 points from the Mavericks.
I think that's absolutely true. And I'll look at the other side of that and kind of look at, where Minnesota State is right now. And it doesn't feel like a lost weekend because you end up with that shootout win, in the second night. That probably feels a little bit better. But you're talking in the last 4 games, you lost an overtime game to Northern. You then came back and beat them. You lose on the road to Tech, and then you tie and get the shootout points. It's hard. I think at the beginning of the year, we had a lot of questions about Minnesota State, and I thought they answered a lot of those questions with some good wins. But now you look back and say, hey, were the 2 wins, was the sweep of Minnesota look that great? Yes, certainly the win over Minnesota at home was fantastic. Then you lost a couple of St. Cloud. So I'm not sure where this team is, but I do know that we'll see a response if this team has the same mettle that they've had for years. We'll see a response. They have 6 more games still to play before break. So there's still plenty of time to make up anything that they might have lost the last couple of weekends. But it's still a hill that you got to climb. Mike Casings tends to get his best teams to perform when he needs them.
And you guys didn't bring up Dryden McKay in there. I think that might be time for a break.
Yeah, we beat that to death last year too, didn't we? We've got a look at the Friendship 4+, our first edition of Buy or Sell coming up. USCHO Weekend Review is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
Sometimes it's not about wanting a new car, it's about needing one. And I needed one I could rely on. So I got an auto loan with DCU. They offer the same low rates on both new and used cars, and I was able to borrow a little extra to make a used car as good as new. My auto loan from DCU means a ride I can finally rely on, which feels like a pretty big thing. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
We're back with USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. I knew that the Friendship Four was a big deal for the U.S. and the people in Belfast, Northern Ireland, but the BBC even had coverage on their website of the game, so it got some attention in the UK. More than 22,000 fans attended the four games, almost 6,000 for the title game. And all the games were pretty competitive and pretty exciting.
I get more impressed by this event every time it's held. And obviously they missed 2 years because of COVID. And I think bringing it back was big for Belfast, for everybody that's put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into organizing this event, going back to 2015 and even all the planning that went into it before then. But it's still special. They did some great things. Robert Fitzpatrick, who runs the Odyssey Trust that runs the tournament, he opened a new science center for young kids learning. Education is a big part of this. And, you saw Marty Meehan, the president of the UMass school system, out there ribbon cutting that center. A lot of their cooperation went into the forming. I just think that is so good for a great community that needs good sports, that thrives on sports. And to see 22,000 fans over the four games, they do a separate admission for all four games. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we talked about Quinnipiac winning it earlier, and we don't need to beat Quinnipiac or pump Quinnipiac up as they would be all three of our number one choices this week. But a really impressive weekend for UMass because their wins are bigger than, they got the tie against Quinnipiac, which goes both ways on a neutral site with them and Quinnipiac. But to beat Lowell, who is ahead of them in the pairwise, was something that's pretty important for them. I'm not diminishing Quinnipiac's win over Dartmouth, but much tougher first round encounter for UMass than it was for Quinnipiac.
Well, I guess this is an obvious thing to ask, but is this something that college hockey needs more of? Some of these in-season tournaments?
Yes, I think the tournaments have kind of been dying lately, and there's a few that are coming back this year, but we as one that had the Three Rivers Classic, I think it's tough for the organizers to keep it rolling. We had it going pretty well with the Three Rivers Classic at the start, and the interest kind of tailed off a little bit because there's just so much involved in getting four teams there. You usually have a host, which you don't, but there's guarantees, there's rent of a big building, there's bringing all these people in for an early game, which sometimes doesn't do as well as the late game. So you're going to see it. You got the Desert Classic coming up in Phoenix. Off the top of my head, other than the Beanpot, what other tournaments are we having this year?
GLI and the Wisconsin tournament is back this year. So
the GLI, but that's moved from Detroit to Grand Rapids. That's going to be an interesting one. That could be a home run though, because you do have a lot of Michigan schools in that one. So we'll see a little bit on that one.
The point I want to make, Beanpot aside, let's just take that one out because it's so old, has so much tradition. You sell out the building. The big buildings are hard to fill. And I think that's one of the best advantages that Belfast has going for them is that they play in about a 7,000 seat building. So when you put 6,000 fans in there for a title game, that atmosphere was unbelievable on Saturday, a packed building.
And that's where you're going to see Grand Rapids, a smaller building than Little Caesars Arena or Joe Louis. I mean, when we did it the first year, we had 14,000 people for the day. And that's because the NHL was on strike. You had a new building in PPG Paints Arena or Consol Energy Center then. So you need a hook and a smaller building even if you get 2,000 people in a 6,000 seat building, that's better than in an 18,000 seat. Desert Classic will be a good one to see. Arizona State playing the night game in both games, no matter if it's for the championship or the third place game, will be interesting. I think you got Air Force there. You have Michigan Tech and BU, maybe BU or BC, one of the Boston schools. Interesting to see how the first two games do there.
Well, it's time for our first segment for this season of Buy or Sell. And basically thinking of it this way as buying or selling stocks. Do you think the stocks are going to go up or down? First one on the list, is Minnesota State still the best team in the CCHA? Buy or sell?
I'm buying. I still think they are. You hit bumps in the road. They've had some good quality wins. I go back to that Minnesota win early in the season. They'll be fine. Do they need to find ways to win these next 6 games before the break? Yes. I think that they need to at least come out 5 of 6. They really would like to come out 6 of 6 because you've got to beat those opponents that are supposed to be below you in the standings. They're supposed to be at the top. So that's most teams, but seriously, I still buy on them.
I'm buying for sure. And because you've got the teams that are there's a top and a bottom within that league. And I'm also going to buy on Michigan Tech because I know that's your next one you're going to go to. But there's a big difference. And I think those right now are the top 2 teams in that league.
Yeah, I'll buy on Michigan Tech as well, but with a caveat that they've still got to prove some things. They've got to find a way to sweep the teams at the bottom of the league because I look back at their schedule every year and they always have some good, impressive signature wins, but they also usually have some signature losses. And you've got to find a way to get up for those games that you're supposed to win.
I'm going to buy on both of those. Mike Hastings has had teams at the top of whatever league he's been in for several years now, going back to the mid-2010s. Michigan Tech, ever since we interviewed Joe Sean last year, Jim, I have been rooting for Michigan Tech a bit because I like that blue-collar lunch bucket attitude that he brings to the effort of that team.
Let's not forget in the CCHA, and we tend to forget some of these teams and some lower wins. Congratulations to St. Thomas, their first sweep in Division I hockey. That's a big weekend for St. Thomas to beat Lake Superior, shut out Lake Superior the first night, and then only give up 1 goal and a 2-1 win the second night. So congratulations, Rico Blasi, too.
UConn, everybody's been talking about the Huskies climbing their way up the ladder in Hockey East. They lost 6-0 to Cornell on Saturday. Do you really buy or sell based on one game?
Can we do this Tuesday night? I'm going to, what is it when you don't want to buy, you don't want to sell, you just want to kind of wait and see?
You hold.
I want to wait and see.
Either that or you hedge, one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, you guys run the gambling column. I can't do any of that stuff. So I want to wait and see. I want to wait and see it. If you had asked me this Wednesday morning, I'd give you a better answer.
I think I'm still buying. I think that's an aberration. What happened on Saturday? I like everything about this team, and they're winning games that they're finding ways to win. And I love a team that can find ways to win games as opposed to teams that find ways to lose games. So I know that there's a big match on Tuesday night that the game against Merrimack will determine a lot, or at least tell us a lot about both of these teams. But I still like UConn. And if they're not hungry, if they don't come out and they don't have a great response after a 6-0 loss, then I might have some more concern, but I'd still probably be buying. I still like this UConn team.
Let's stick around Hockey East. Where does BU fall in all this? I think they have been kind of a surprise for me. Jay Pandolfo's Terriers, buy or sell?
I'm buying on this based on the eye test. They've lost some games that I sit there and say how, but I think they're young in certain positions, but boy, they have speed and they have enough old upper class skill that I think that they can get there. They have a great goaltender in Drew Comesso. I think they need consistency, but if you give me one team in Hockey East that has to win an NCAA tournament game based on what I've seen this year, and the only team I have not seen, I think, in person, the only 2 teams I haven't seen in person this weekend or this season, and I probably should just go on Tuesday night, is UConn and Merrimack. Haven't seen either of them in person. But I think that BU, give me them in one game. They have the talent, they have the speed, and they have a lot of the good characteristics to win almost any game, a single game situation.
Jimmy went into it in depth there. I'm just going to say I would buy.
Well, how about the whole conference in general? Is Hockey East on a slide 4-6-1 over the weekend? It's been sort of an off year compared to NCHC and Big Ten for the other so-called Premier League. Is this a down year for Hockey East, buy or sell?
Wow, you really want us to get a call from Steve Metcalf, don't you? I mean, holy cow. I'm going to buy. They've still got 5 teams in the top, 6 teams in the top 16 right now. So yeah, tough weekend. I'm still buying.
Yeah, I didn't like some of the losses this weekend for Hockey East, but you still look across the whole slate of what they've done across each conference. They really make their heyday on Atlantic hockey, but they had losses to Atlantic this weekend. They make their heyday on the ECAC. They had losses to the ECAC this weekend. You sit there and you want to make sure that where a conference is going. Derek used the best parameter. They've got 6 teams in the top 16 right now. That to me is enough. We haven't sold on anything, I guess. I mean, maybe it'll come up. Maybe I didn't write these questions well enough so we get some selling, but I'm still buying on Hockey East.
But isn't that what we're trying to do over the course? I mean, it's a course of a year. I mean,
maybe I still rank Hockey East ahead of the NCHC right now. That's just
now you're market. Now you're going to be called a mark by all the the trolls.
But I can also point to a non-conference record. And right now, despite the fact that the NCHC, I think, is 2 games up on Hockey East head-to-head, conference-wise, conference to conference, the Hockey East has the better non-conference record.
I guess we have a bull market this episode.
Are you buying or selling?
I said I was buying.
No, I'm talking about Ed.
Oh, no, I'm buying. I think there are enough teams that are playing better than expected that this is a good year for Hockey East. Let's switch to the NCHC. A split on the weekend with Omaha. Is Denver the best team in the NCHC? Buy or sell?
So I'm finally going to sell. I think St. Cloud is the best team in the NCHC. Denver's there, and they're going to get a lot of credit, just name credit and national champion, defending national champion credit. But I think they've got some things that need to improve before the end of the season. They do really well at home. But they've got to find ways to win the games that they have to win the games that they're supposed to win. I think that St. Cloud is the better team.
I mean, we're talking about if they're the best team in one of the best conferences. I mean, that's a difficult bar to reach on that one. If you're talking selling on the top team, yeah, that's always debatable. So I'd sell that way, but selling on their season, I mean, I'm not to that point yet after one loss. So I'm with you as far as, potentially not being the top team in the league because St. Cloud is very good, but I still think they're going to be there at the end. Never count them out. I've learned that we none of us picked them to win last year. Every day we didn't pick them to win in the semis. We didn't pick them to win in the finals, and they keep proving us wrong.
I'm a cautious buy on this one. Somehow St. Cloud, its 2 bye weeks have managed to happen in a time that it's good for them. Not that they planned it that way, but with a weekend off and other people having adversity, that sort of helps them a little bit. We got a couple of teams in Atlantic hockey to look at. RIT was riding pretty high until getting beaten by Princeton on Saturday, 5-0. And by the way, all 3 wins for Princeton this season have been shutouts, which is pretty remarkable. Are you buying or selling on RIT?
I'm buying. They've proven it over the course of 14 games now. I think they'd be in the top, potentially in the top 16 because they were on the borderline before that loss to Princeton. You're going to have some of those games, but at 11-3 right now and sitting at 20th, top Atlantic hockey team, I'm buying. They're right now. They're proving it on a week-to-week basis right now, and they beat the top teams right now as well. They beat the defending champion, the 4-time defending champion, and they just keep rolling. So best goalie in the league from what other coaches have told me.
Yeah, Tommy Scarfoni, his only loss was the opening game against Union, a 4-3 loss, but he's 10-1 on the season, a .923 save percentage.
Yeah, I will buy RIT in Atlantic hockey. I'm not sure I would buy them in the national picture just yet. It's one of those things that a team that's 41st in the pairwise comes in and beats you 5-0. You got to kind of pause. It's almost like what we're looking at with UConn, right? What's going to happen in their next game? Let's see how they respond to this. How do you come back off of a loss that probably hurts a little bit more than average? You don't love sitting there on the bench and watching pucks go in and go in and go in. So that's one of those things. I think that if they can come back and play some good teams, ask me again in 2 weeks and I might be a little higher on RIT.
that was a disappointing loss too, because like you said, 40 that after handling, I mean, they did a pretty good job of getting off to a big lead in the first game. And then when I turned it on, it was already 4-0. I'm like, get this one. The Tigers were up 4-0. The black and orange Tigers. I mean, you had both teams Tigers, both teams black and orange. I mean, it was an interesting weekend, but I was very surprised when I turned the score on and saw 4-0 for the Princeton.
Yeah, the wheels kind of came off in the third period, and I've got to buy if I ever want to walk into the arena again. But
another mark.
Yeah, no, but I think one thing that is a good thing to think about for RIT, their head coach Wayne Wilson said after the game in the interview that the team really hadn't faced any adversity yet this season, and it was a good opportunity to see how they can react to it and learn from it. But I'll tell you, somebody who's really impressive right now in Atlantic hockey is Niagara, at least out of conference. Right now, they're 4-0. They swept Omaha early, swept Colgate, one of those, an overtime win on Saturday. Do you buy or sell the Purple Eagles?
I think I'm gonna hedge my bets again. I want to see a little bit more, because I think their goaltender is playing outstanding right now in Chad Valtteri. And he's continuing to make save after save after save. And so I can't make a decision on this. I need to see a little bit more. I think you're going to see the test of time. I think there's some separation in the league. There were some sweeps, which were big. Mercier swept Air Force. And so I don't know. I'm sold on RIT being the top in Atlantic hockey right now. I'm not sure if Sacred Heart's the next team, if AIC is the next team, or if Niagara is the next team. I'm all over the map as far as the next best team right now.
Well, I'll tell you, their numbers speak well. 5 wins in a row and just 1 loss since October 21st. That's a pretty good month of November that Jason Lammers and his Purple Eagles were able to put together. I'd buy on them. I think that they are they're winning these games that, for one thing, they're helping the conference. We talk about how do you get the conference up to a 400 winning percentage or better. Well, they're getting back after being in the 200s early in the year. And it's teams like Niagara that can go 4-0 against some tough opponents. I mean, we talk about Omaha going out and sweeping Denver, and Omaha impressing us. Hey, they had 2 wins against them early, and then you say, oh, maybe that was a fluke. And then they go back and beat Colgate. So I was impressed by what Jason Lammers, his team, was able to pull off this weekend. So I'm going to buy on Niagara. Yeah,
you know what? I'm going to put on my Atlantic hockey hat and buy on Niagara. I think they might squeak in as the number 2 team in the league. I watched a couple of their games. I like not only their goaltending from Valtteri, who's been good, but they're a team that transitions quickly and really attacks the net. And I think that they're going to be formidable against anybody who takes them on.
You know what you're going to see? You're going to see Army and AIC on the road. These are tough. It's always tough to win an Army, and you're going to AIC. That's your Christmas. And then you'll see more where they're at. But they're definitely in the top 4. That's for sure.
Well, let's turn to the ECAC, our last buy or sell. Maybe after this weekend, it's an obvious answer. But if you had to buy or sell one team, would it be Harvard or Quinnipiac? And boy, I say why not both, but Jim wants us to pick one.
Well, I'm picking Quinnipiac, but cautiously. They're a very good team. They're a complete team. They're an older team too. I think that the age and experience on that team bodes well. Harvard, very good, very young though. That's one of those teams that Teddy Donato gets a lot out of his players. He has a ton of talent, but if I had to pick one, Quinnipiac's my team.
Well, seeing that we all said they were going to be the number 1 team in the nation, I think you got to buy on this one. And we should also change this week's wrap up to the Quinnipiac show.
I just found out that a guy who worked for me when we had a sports radio station, worked as an intern, now works in social media at Quinnipiac. So I was wondering why he was in Belfast at the same time as the team. And now I know. He was pretty excited. But yeah, great week for Quinnipiac. They got all our accolades and we're going to buy. So how about that? Got to keep it rolling, Rand, and we'll stay behind you. USCHO Weekend Review is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org. Find our podcast at uscho.com/podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. For Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Weekend Review.